Yeah, welcome back, everyone. I'm very pleased that we're joined here with Valdis Krebs, who our paths have been crossing for a few years now. A while ago, when I got interested in network analysis, Valdis was early on the scene to offer a helping hand, and I guess I could consider my mentor in these matters. And I'll let you kind of fully introduce yourself, but I'm aware that Valdis came to prominence early days using network analytical methods to map out the 9/11 terrorist network using open source methodologies. And as we said in the preamble today, we identified a couple of themes that we think are relevant to the question of protecting democracy. And what we've noticed through our investigations and through the talks today is that all of them are kind of related together. So I think it's really appropriate time in the day that we kind of address directly the fact of, well, how do you see those networks? How do you visualize them? And also because our intent is to be practical and to, over the course of today and tomorrow in the dialogue, develop practical solutions. I'm really excited in our pre-discussion before this event that I think we're going to get a practical example that people can apply these things to over the course of the next hour. So you didn't come here to listen to me, you came here to listen to Valdis. So over to you. Thank you for joining us. And I think we're going to learn something now.
Okay, thank you, Esco. Okay, great. So I will talk about my fairly long history of discovering and visualizing networks of people and organizations using public and other open source data. And here's a little bit about me. I have a technical background, math, computer science, and then I have a master's degree in HR and organizational behavior. Also got a certificate in AI, which we apply in our data analysis and our data mining. I started out as a corporate weenie, working for Ford, Toyota USA, TRW Disney. And then I started my own business doing solely network analysis in 1995. And started in a garage in California, but now I'm in a couple bedrooms here in Cleveland, Ohio. And so I've been working from home. It's not a new thing for me. I've been doing that basically since 95. And so I do this thing called social network analysis. And it's both a visual and mathematical analysis of how people interact and how they communicate and how they learn from each other. And what's nice is that once we get a map of these connections, once we get a network, we can also measure it. We can look at who's got a lot of connections, who's got important connections, who's got bridging connections, things like that. And so we can look at, we can gain some insights into the social space that we've just mapped. And so here's a typical organizational network that I've worked on. I've shared this quite a bit, so those of you that have been on social media might have seen this, but this is basically a client of mine that has 4 different departments, and each department has a different color for their nodes. And the employee names have been replaced by numbers for privacy. And we're showing 2 networks here. We're showing a network, we're showing the hierarchy. Doesn't look like a hierarchy, doesn't look like an org chart, but that's the black thin line with the arrow. It shows who reports to whom. And then the gray lines show who actually works with whom. So we're looking at both the kind of the formal network and the informal network, although we call those networks the prescribed network, the hierarchy, and the emergent network, how things actually happen in an organization. So that's kind of how I got started, and I'm still doing that kind of work, still working on a project today, helping an organization figure out how to return to work, but not fully. Have some people be remote and have some people be on site. And so here's a again a typical simple toy network, and this is called the kite network for obvious reasons, and we see how people are connected in getting things done, and just looking at the network. I'll ask you to answer these questions for yourself, but who is the best connected in this network? Who would you say if somebody asked you, if they showed you this, they said, who's the best connected? Not who's the most connected, but who's the best connected? And we get that data very simply through organizing it in a spreadsheet. So there's the node data for the network you just saw, and then there's the link data. And then the link data can have various descriptors to it. We have from, to, the strength of the tie, and then we can name it. Here we've just named it number 1. And the same with the nodes. We can put in a name, and here we're just tracking gender and work group, but we can track all sorts of things like location, education, seniority, all sorts of things like that organizations may want to look at for their employees. And we get this information basically from the client themselves. So HR provides the basic data of who works there, and then the employees normally fill out a survey that where they respond about who they work with, who they seek advice from, who they might share ideas with, things like that. But our approach here today is to look at kind of two things that's a little different than looking inside organizations. We're looking at both surveillance and what's called surveillance. And so I thought this quote from Harari was pretty interesting, because this is what's happening. We're getting surveilled, but we need to turn the cameras the other way too, and start looking at who's surveilling us. So what often happens in networks is they're obscured, and we see some things in networks. So like we see these buildings in Chicago, but like the fog that's rolled in off of Lake Michigan, we don't see how to get from one building to another. Are these buildings connected? Is there a pathway from building 1 to building 2? We often things are, to quote the old Pink Floyd song, are obscured by clouds. And here's another view of a landscape photo, and here we also see the things that are closer to us are clearer, and the further away that things get, the more foggy they get, the more obscure they get, the harder they are to see and to understand. So in networks, we've heard the phrase 6 degrees of separation, that any one of us is separated by at the most 6 steps in the worldwide network. But that might be what's so, but it's also so what. What we have found in our work is that the key steps in a network are the 1 and 2 step connections, and occasionally 3-step connections. So what we know in networks is that networks have a horizon. And just like a physical horizon in the world, we can't see over the horizon. We know something's there. Like if I were to go to the shore of Lake Erie now and look due north, I know Canada is over there. I just can't see it. It's over the horizon. So it's the same thing that happens in networks is they have this horizon. The visible horizon is 1 to 2 steps. 2 steps even starts to get a little foggy. 3 steps is real foggy, but we can occasionally see out that far. But 4 steps and beyond, we're basically blind to what's going on in the network, unless it's public information, unless it's on the news or in social media or something like that. So my very first network that I mapped using public data was this network of the internet industry. And basically, I ran across a document that had recorded all the partnership, all the strategic alliances that were happening within the internet industry. And they listed all the companies, they listed something about them. They told us, whether these companies focused on content, commerce, or infrastructure. And so we were able to draw a gray link between two companies that had announced a strategic partnership. And so we see some of the key players back then. This is around the turn of the century. So we see IBM, Microsoft, and does anybody remember AOL? But they were a key player back then. And another way of looking at industry network analysis is we can look at corporations. So here are the boards of directors, names are removed, of the Fortune 50 companies, so top 50 companies. And again, this data is several years old, so this isn't today's Fortune 50, but what we see is there's a red node for each member of the board, and then each member of the board is connected to each other member of the board for the particular company that they're in. So we see 50 apparently independent networks that are tightly clustered. But if we look at how people really appear in networks, we see that like when Steve Jobs was alive, he was a member of two boards. He was a member of Apple's board, but he was also a member of Disney's board. So we changed his color to blue to signify that he's a bridge node, or he's a boundary spanner between these two clusters. And what we find is that Steve wasn't alone. There were a lot of people that had multiple board memberships. So that network of 50 independent clusters really looks like this. And so there's connections between these boards, and the connectors are these blue nodes. And these blue nodes are also connected to each other by being together in board meetings in often more than one organization. So the real interesting network, the kind of the power network, if you will, looks like this. And here what we've done is we've taken all the blue nodes out of the network. We've left the red nodes that aren't attached to anybody else other than their local board. We've put those aside. And now we measure the network, and the size of the node represents how well located this person is in the network. So most of you have heard the golden rule of real estate, which is location, location, location. Well, the golden rule of networks is also location, location, location. So where you're located in the network gives you certain advantages and also certain constraints. So like Esko said, I kind of came to fame with this mapping of the 9/11 network of hijackers, and basically how that happened was I had been working in the corporate space, and I had been a member of the mostly academics, this professional organization, Social Network Analysts. And so after 9/11 happened, we started chatting online. We keep hearing this phrase terrorist network on CNN and other places, but what does a terrorist network look like? And none of us really knew, because none of us had ever worked in that space. And so we all kind of shrugged our shoulders. We keep hearing this phrase, but none of us can map it. None of us can say this is what a terrorist network looks like. So the whole world kind of stopped, and a lot of my clients called and said, "Oh, we're just going to put things off for the rest of the year. We'll resume activity again in January." So I had some free time, and I thought, well, if nobody knows what this looks like, maybe I'll try to figure it out. And so I just started to read the newspaper online, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, anybody that was writing about it, and it was usually everybody, and so all sorts of information was coming up, and slowly started to, as they say, connect the dots. So what's interesting in this network is that here's a view of the network, and this is just the participants in 9/11, and the nodes are colored by the plane that they were on. But these connections were, as far as I could determine, the connections they had before they came over to the US. So these were connections that they had established in the Middle East and in Europe and wherever else they were hanging out together. So this was the network, but if you notice, it's kind of like a long serpent-like network, and it really, there's, I said 1, 2, and 3 steps matter in a network, but if you go from the green node at the bottom to the red node at the top, there's more than 3 steps, and so you wonder, well, why is it set up this way? Well, part of the reason could be it's set up this way is that it's a network that's covert and is trying to hide, and so they don't want to be a dense network, which is much more easy to find and discover and then unravel. But what we found is that this might have been the network once they came over, but once they were here, they started talking to each other. They started to have meetings. They had meetings in Las Vegas, they had meetings on the East Coast, and so on. And so that serpent kind of folded over, and you see those gold lines in there, right here in the middle. Those were now the kind of the cross communications that they started to do in preparation for 9/11, because after all, they were a project team, and any project team, has information to exchange, has deadlines to meet, has coordination to do. So they had to form a typical project team like communication structure in order to get things done. And what we see over here is that the network before the serpent image that I showed you, if you look at under average path length in the table, was 4.75. And again, that means that the average path length between any 2 nodes in that network is almost 5. And again, that's much greater than the 1, 2, or 3 steps that I mentioned. But now, when they have these cross connects, all of a sudden the network becomes much more efficient, and their average path length between any 2 nodes gets under the magic 3 number. So this is kind of the final network of that I mapped, and I wrote a paper about it, and soon I was getting calls from Washington, D.C. to come down and explain what I did and how I did it. So we see the pilots, we see the other hijackers, we see the flights they were on, and then we see some of their other support systems. So what we normally see in human networks is this what's called a core periphery structure. And so we see the core around the hijackers, and then the periphery around the support structure. So these are people that were getting them money. These are people that were getting them, last minute instructions from Al Qaeda headquarters and things like that. But these were people that were not in the U.S. themselves. So one day I started to think about, as I was browsing through books on Amazon, I was starting to think about their way of sharing information. I'm looking at a book, and it says people that read this book also read these books, or also bought these books. That's the phrase they were using at the time. So I started looking at political books, and lo and behold, I thought, well, I can map this out. So I started with a couple of political books that I knew about, and I mapped them out, and I got these two clusters. I got this one cluster on the right, this one cluster on the left, and this one book in the middle, which seemed to be the only book that both sides seemed to be reading. And when I looked at the two clusters, it became fairly obvious which one was the right wing and which one was the progressive wing. And so I colored them blue, red. I published this, and a lot of people said, "Oh, that's very interesting." And what's interesting is I did this back in 2003, and I've been doing this basically every year. I do a map just to see what's going on. And the interesting thing is that every year there's different books, but the pattern really doesn't change. The pattern, there's a strong cluster on the left, there's a strong cluster on the right. Sometimes there's a book or two or three in the middle, and sometimes there's not. So this is 2003, and this is just a couple months ago, 2021. So we got some purple books in the middle there, but again, we got our red cluster, we got our blue cluster, and as anybody that's lived here in the US knows, that's life. So one of the things that we can also do is we can say, hey, let's look at a book that we like. So here's a book, How to Lose the Information War. It might be of interest to all the participants today. And so what we do is we go out there and we select this book, go to the web page that it's on, and then Amazon tells us that these other books are also either bought. That was their original thing. People that bought this book also bought that book. But now that people are buying Kindle, Amazon knows even a little more about you. They know if you're reading the book, and they know what you're reading, and they also know what you're underlining. So they can now get a lot more insight into how people are responding to the information that they're getting and the information that they're choosing and that they're interested in. So the magenta colored node there in the middle, that's our focus node, or that's in the social network analysis terminology, that would be the ego in this ego network that we've mapped. And when we say ego, we don't mean it in the terms that Freud uses it, but ego in social network analysis terms means an individual or a focus node. And then the green nodes are the ones that are connected to the focus node, and then the blue nodes are the second step away from the focus node. So if you've read this book, How to Lose the Information War, and you like it, and you want to read something mostly similar, you may want to look at one of the green books and make that as your next purchase. But if you want to read something not quite as similar, but more different, but still within the ballpark, still within the neighborhood of the original book, you might look at one of the blue nodes, and you might look at one of the blue nodes that are more densely connected into the network. So I've read Network Propaganda. That's a good book. It's very academic, but it's very thorough, and it's something that I recommend. And the other book too that's a little well connected, Messing with the Enemy. That's a little more I don't know, folk science, if you want to call it. It's a little more accessible. It's not as deep. It's not academic at all, and that's also a good book to read. So you can take any book on Amazon, or you can take any type of books on Amazon, or I did the political book analysis in the US, but Amazon has a UK site, they have a German site, they have Spanish site, they have multiple sites, so you can look at the political books in these various other places in the world and see if there's a similar pattern between right and left readers as we see in the US. So here again is the book that we're focusing on, how to lose the information war. And we see at the top is customers who read this book also read. So it lists 7 books, and that's usually what we look for. We look for somewhere between 5 and 7 friends of this book that are connected to this book. And so the books that have been read are on top, the books that have been bought are on the bottom, and we see that it's a highly similar list. There's only a few books that seem to pop up in the reading that weren't in the high to low numbers in being bought. So the reading numbers are much lower, because what happens is a lot of books get bought and they get put on the shelf and they don't get read, or political parties will buy a book from one of their famous members, and just to jack up these Amazon numbers. And so again, people buy these books, they might hand them out for free at rallies and events, but they don't get read. And that's the interesting thing about the Kindle books, is that the Kindle books, Amazon actually knows when you got that book open, and when you're reading it, and what you're skipping in the book and what you're underlining and things like that. So live in Cleveland, and lo and behold, Cleveland is not immune from corruption, just like any other major city in the world. And around 2008, 2007, our local county government was raided by the FBI and the local authorities, and it turned out that there were basically pay-to-play corruption going on in the county. So if you were a county vendor, like either roads or electrician or a builder or something like that, you would have to pay certain officials within the government in order to get your contracts approved. And so again, we started to, just like with 9/11, we started to read the newspaper. And the Cleveland Plain Dealer at the time had many reporters on this story, because it was the biggest thing happening in Cleveland. And so there were news stories every day. And here's just one of them that we picked at random. And what I highlighted in yellow is the network information that's in the article. And if you look at news stories, if you look at legal documents, indictments, things like that, court cases, there's network information in just about everything. And so we see this one story. I highlighted the connections in the story, the dots and the links. And then if we look at this next one, we see that this is the network that emerged from this story. So we can see who was mentioned, how they were connected, and we see that there were family connections, there were friendship connections, there were financial connections, money flows, and there were employment connections. So this little network, which included the 3 main culprits in the pay-to-play scheme, emerged out of just one network. And what we did was, once we had one network like this, we would just read more and more and more, and then add to the network. Sometimes we take away from the network because we'd find that somebody that was under suspicion really wasn't, and so they're no longer involved in the scheme. So the final network looked like this. And again, the 3 amigos there that are highlighted were the the people behind the scheme, and they were all arrested and put in prison for quite a while. So yeah, that was kind of the whole network. And again, we basically built this network day by day by reading the paper on a daily basis. There's some more work out of Cleveland that also looks at one of the three amigos, this guy at the bottom left corner, Frank Russo. But this shows you something that's prevalent in corruption networks. What we know from studying networks is that distance in networks delays things and deceives what's going on and distorts things. If like the old game of telephone, you start here with a message and you get 2 or 3 or 4 intermediaries, and shortly by the 5th or 6th person, the message is started is totally different. So when people do illegal and bad things, they try to keep a distance in the network. And so again, we had a story here where this Mirage nightclub lost their liquor license, and then we see how the owner of the nightclub, this guy named Dean, who was a member of the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, and Frank Russo was one of the top people in the Democratic Party at the time, and how this kind of loop of influence or loop of deceit, happened. So we see that the Ohio Liquor Board doesn't see what's in this cloud. So if we go back to those pictures of Chicago, we see that some of this is hidden. All they know is they get a letter from this official in Cleveland saying, you should really reinstate that liquor license for this Mirage Club. They don't see the connections between the Mirage Club and the person requesting a favor for the Mirage Club. So that's always the thing that we're looking for in these networks is, what's obscured by the cloud. And so also during the 2008 financial crisis, Cleveland was one of the focus points in the US because we had just so many homes that were being flipped, and mortgages were failing, and they were put into CDOs, which were then being sold on Wall Street. So here was a typical house. I took this picture myself, visited this neighborhood with the local council person, and this was one of the homes that ended up in one of the CDOs that was being sold as a great investment during the financial crisis. So this house, and then here's a list. And again, this spreadsheet was created by the councilman in that area, Anthony Brancatelli. And he basically went around and looked at which houses were dilapidated, which ones had just been sold, and so on. And what he found was that a lot of the same names kept showing up. So a lot of the same sellers were showing up. So these people were basically flipping these houses. They'd buy them for $10,000, literally, and then they put a little bit of paint on them, and then they sell them for a lot more, for $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. And that's pretty good return on a couple gallons of paint. And then he found that the appraisers and the mortgage brokers, again, the names kept showing up again and again. So what we did is we put all this data into our software, and what we found, and then we got some other information from Wall Street firms that was available through the U.S. Congress, And so we see the house that I had photographed. That's the little whoops. That's the little red indicator here. But all these other addresses were failed Cleveland mortgages. But the people on Wall Street didn't care that they were failed mortgages. They were all put into this mortgage trust. And then all of these mortgage trusts, and we don't know how, they were probably equally full of bad mortgages, not mortgages that were being paid and therefore a good investment. And they were then all packaged into this particular CDO, which was Abacus 2007 AC1. And so that's basically, so here again, we see a kind of a clearer path. So again, the same house, 3729 East 54th, goes through all these players into these mortgage trusts, and then it's sold by Goldman Sachs as a CDO to investors. And most of these investors were not necessarily in the U.S. A lot of European and Asian investors that really didn't understand what was going on, but they thought, hey, Moody's has approved this, Goldman Sachs is selling it, it's got to be a good deal. So a lot of people bought into it, and then none of the mortgages were paying the way they should for the investment vehicle to work the way it should. So that's how Main Street was connected to Wall Street in the financial crisis of 2008. And this wasn't just happening in Cleveland. This was happening in all sorts of cities. A lot of so-called Rust Belt cities. It was happening in Detroit and Buffalo and places like that. But also in non-Rust Belt areas, this was happening in Arizona and parts of Los Angeles and so on. So what we found is when we put all the data together, and we looked at all the flows, all the money flows, the thicker lines show more flow between those entities. And so this was a kind of a compact picture of the mortgage mess in Cleveland, showing all the main players and the minor players. So it was easy for somebody to understand this whole big financial scheme with this view. So basically what we found is that, and we had found this in other situations too, that we can go from spreadsheets to networks to understanding. So we could get a better idea of what was really going on in a complex human event by taking this view of, let's gather the data, let's find the patterns in it, and then let's make sense of it. So there was also what's been associated with this Russian lawyer Magnitsky, Sergei Magnitsky, and the reason that this whole financial scheme is associated with him is because he was the one that discovered it, and then unfortunately he was arrested for it and blamed for it, and that's something that I guess happens quite often in Russia. So this money, this tax money from Hermitage Capital went into the Russian treasury, and then it basically got repurposed and rerouted through all these Russian firms. And again, this is all kind of hidden. And then it went through Moldova, and then it went through all these banks in Europe, including a couple in Latvia, and ended up in all these offshore accounts. basically, outside the U.S. So Cayman Islands, Bahamas, things like that. So again, the cloud is there. The money is originally here, and then all of a sudden it's in all these offshore accounts. So how does it get there? And this we put together through, and again, in an investigative legal document that came out of a law firm in England. That Bill Browder, the owner of Hermitage Capital, had hired this law firm to figure out what the heck happened. And law firm wrote up this very nice long report that explained things, and that's how we were able to get this map done and get a better understanding of what happened and who was involved. Also, currently in the EU, we have this whole issue of Nord Stream 2. But before there was Nord Stream 2, there was Nord Stream 1, and that's basically an agreement between Russia and Germany to get natural gas into Europe for heating homes. And what was happening before, when Russia and Ukraine were somewhat getting along, was that most of the flow through from Russia to the EU was happening through Ukraine. And so Russia was very dependent upon Ukraine, and so was Europe to get this natural gas. And so we see the various countries are the squares, the various natural gas fields are in blue, the circles. And so there's some natural gas fields in Africa that are feeding gas in through Italy, and there's natural gas fields up in the North Sea, which is feeding gas into Europe through Norway. But most of it's coming from either Azerbaijan or Turkmenistan or Russia itself, and a lot of it is flowing through Ukraine and also through Belarus. And so what happened was, as we know, Russia and Ukraine have over the years gotten to be from more of a friendship and cooperating relationship to enemies. And so Russia wanted to route around Ukraine. And so they came up with this concept of Nord Stream. And what that looks like is this red arrow. So Russia was going to run a pipeline through the Baltic Sea that was going to go straight to Germany. And it was going to route around Ukraine. And they discovered when they put in Nord Stream 1 that didn't supply enough volume. So they came up with Nord Stream 2, which is currently in the news. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to take the Ukraine completely out of this relationship to where they originally back here, Ukraine had what we call in network analysis betweenness. So they were highly between things that were flowing from one place to another place. And if you're highly between somewhere, that usually gives you power, and that gives you power of control. Ukraine could have done things. They could have delayed the flow. They could have done all sorts of things. And as Ukraine and Russia were getting more and more antagonistic towards each other, those kinds of things were popping up. Russia didn't want to turn off this great cash cow that they had with gas in Europe, so they figured out a way to route around Ukraine. And unfortunately, now that Ukraine is out of the picture for getting gas there, that puts Ukraine in a very weak position. Russia has already invaded part of Ukraine, the eastern part of Ukraine. And so, as soon as Nord Stream 2 gets connected, there's a lot of people that fear, what's going to happen to Ukraine now. So Nord Stream 2 is a path into Europe for natural gas, and Belarus is still a path. But Belarus is our allies with Putin, and so they're still a viable path. But Russia wants to own the pipe that gets the gas out and into Europe. So this was some network power manipulation, and some pretty good, because it seems to be working its intended purpose, unfortunately. So here's some U.S. power politics. Back when the U.S. was looking at changing healthcare and looking at this new concept called the Affordable Care Act, there were various Congress people that were sitting on these committees, and there were these 6 senators that were sitting on a committee in the Senate that were very important. And one of these senators, Max Baucus, there, the magenta-colored node, was literally surrounded by lobbyists, which are the green-colored nodes. And the lobbyists were hired by all of these blue-colored nodes. So all these different companies and organizations and legal groups and other interest and influence groups had hired all these lobbyists to lobby Max to do this Affordable Care Act the way that they wanted it done, not the way that it was best for the U.S. citizens. So this is just one example, but we see this kind of surrounding of politicians all over the world by various lobbyists that are hired by various outside interests. So here again, we see who's who and how they're connected. Bernie Madoff also was arrested for a huge pyramid scheme, and here are all the other organizations that helped money flow into his investment fund, which turned out to be a pyramid scheme. So we see that there's a lot of organizations involved, some of them knowingly, maybe some of them unknowingly, but these schemes have their tentacles that reach out far. Here's a picture of U.S. power politics in 2016. So this right here, this network, is a summary of the first 200 pages of the Mueller report. So this is volume 1 of the Mueller report, and what we have here is we show blue nodes, which were kind of part of the Trump camp. So these are people that were working with and for Trump during the 2016 election. We have red nodes that were part of Putin's camp. And then we have 2 colored links. We have gray links, and those are the communications and the relationships within each camp. So we see a gray link, we probably see 2 red nodes or 2 blue nodes connected. But the pink nodes, or the magenta colored, the pink links or the magenta colored links are between camps. So that's where the Russian camp and the US camp are communicating or are interacting on something. So the big thing after the Mueller report came out was no collusion, no collusion. That the Republicans were screaming, but here we see that there was plenty of opportunity for collusion, for coordination, for cooperation, collaboration, whatever you want to, whatever C word you want to use. there were, there was, a good portion of this network was set up for that to happen. Now, the end result of this was that nothing quite happened here, but people are still looking at this and still looking at, what were those relationships that might have been nefarious in this 2016 election in the U.S. So that's a sampling of the work I've done, looking at political corruption, looking at influence, and all using publicly available data to get insights into all of that. So are there any questions from anybody?
We've got a very specific one from Kai, who says, is there a similar map for New York City, for the mortgages one?
Not that I've done, but maybe, maybe somebody else has done that. The problem with a lot of this work now is that the information has become harder to get. So when I was working on this, the World Wide Web was a brand new thing, and everybody was putting everything up on the World Wide Web, and they weren't putting it behind, firewalls and paywalls and things like that. So information was pretty easy to get. Now, if you try to do some of this stuff, it's much more difficult. It's still possible, you can still get, you can still do an analysis of boards. In fact, I did another analysis of nonprofit boards. So here in the U.S., there's I forgot exactly the form number, but there's a tax document that every nonprofit has to file each year, and on it has to list its paid employees and or its top paid employees, but also its board members. So you can still do analysis like that of various nonprofit organizations. And a lot of these political action committees are nonprofits, and so again, you can start to see who sits on some of these boards and who are some of the executives, and the executives in one organization sit on boards of similar others. So that data is still available, but it is harder to do this. So, like for instance, the information that we were able to get through congressional investigation on those CDOs that Goldman Sachs was selling, you can't go to Goldman Sachs site and get that kind of information these days. Back then, the Congress had gotten it and had posted it and made it public, and so we were able to use it to fill in that final path from Main Street to Wall Street.
Do you find that's a trend? I mean, I think I saw something on the news today that again some court has prevented the release of some Trump documentation that recently had been authorized to be released. And like in Finland, it's traditional salary information is public, and this time of year, every year they publish like the 200 biggest earners. But recently there's been an opportunity, a facility for people to request that their information not be published on that. I don't know if it's related to GDPR and stuff, but so it's trending that people are saying, do not publish my information. And I wonder if that's something to do with the success of the open source intelligence activities from, such as yours and those like organizations like Bellingcat, where bad people are getting a lot more smart about protecting their
Yeah,
information.
well, yeah, and there's things like, like the recently released Pandora Papers, and before that, the Panama Papers and all that, that have this kind of information in there. But, there too, it's, everybody's kind of fighting for that data, like to get that, the Pandora, to get the data file, a person, an independent researcher like me has a hard time getting that, because, the consortium of journalists that have worked on that they want access to it first. So they can write all their articles, and then, maybe in a year or two, they'll open it up to everybody. But, there's still good sources, like in the US, there's a good site that I use a lot, especially looking at lobbyists and so on, called opensecrets.org. So they have lots of information, and they make it easy to to download that information. So you just look at the information you want, and there's a place on the page to do a click, and you get the CSV file. And so that goes into Excel and helps you get things organized. I was looking at who are all the different researchers getting active and collaborating with each other on COVID. And so there's a medical database that's run by the U.S. government called PubMed. And so we're able to get who's publishing articles with whom. So again, if you're publishing an article with somebody, it doesn't mean that all of your co-authors, but at least some of them. And the more you publish together, the chances are you know more and more of these co-authors. So it's possible to see relationships amongst the medical researchers and doctors and things like that, just on their publication history. And it's the same with just about any other academic field. But again, some of those sites that have all that academic information on who published what, when, with whom, are behind a paywall. So you have to pay to play. And I did some analysis for some city governments, looking at some of their economic leaders and power people locally. And there's another site called Relationship Science that has a lot of that information. They have a lot of the board data and some of the other ways that people are connected. But unfortunately, a lot of that data is old. So you go to a corporation's website and download their latest annual report, which lists most accurately their latest board members. And then you look at some of these other sites, and I don't want to just pick on Relationship Science, but there's others, and you see that, oh yeah, they have the board members, but it's from 3 years ago, and and the list has changed now. So
we've
just
got a
like
couple
with
other
any
questions.
other data science, you have a lot of cleanup to do before you can do a viable map.
Wow. We've had a few more questions come in. I think these will be the last ones we field, but I'll clump them together because they're inquiring about the methodology. So would this be a method to assist in the legal determination of the nature of an organization as a criminal organization? Example, action, read the Trump organization. And do you see network mapping as a data visualization exercise and/or an evaluation exercise? In other words, how do you describe the relationship between presenting data and interpreting it? And I'll throw in the last one because it's a comment really, but like, is this stuff more useful after the fact to map what happened, or are there kind of detection and predictive analytic capabilities available? Um, if you can handle all of those in your last answer.
Yeah, we'll start with the last one, and then we'll see if I remember the first one. So the last one is, yeah, it's good for after the fact, but as you're doing this legal research, it's also good for for mapping out what you're finding. So as you're uncovering things, you find certain things, and then the prediction part is, prediction is oversold these days, especially with AI. I like to say prediction is hard, especially if it's about the future. And it is. It's not just a smart ass thing. It's true. But there are ways that we know about how people group and organize, and some basics of sociology that we can apply, and we can say, oh, okay, here's what we know so far, based on what we know and based on how people normally interact. Here's some possible connections that we haven't found evidence for yet. And so, it's a type of thing we can say, look for these, look at, for, you give this to the FBI and you say, okay, find out how these two people are connected, because they obviously must be, based on all of their other connections and where they are in the network. So it allows you to focus your search, but it doesn't necessarily give you a perfect answer that these two people will be connected, but there's a real good chance that they probably are, but we just don't know how and why. So yeah, is it good for evaluation? Yes, and it's good for evaluation because you want to present it to somebody that knows what's actually going on. So when we do network analysis in an organization, we present the results back to management, and we have management help us make sense of what's going on, because the data alone is not sufficient to understand what's going on. But the people that understand the organization or the ecosystem that we're looking at, together with the data scientists, can make sense of what's happening and figure out what are some possible truths and what are possible things we can do. We need to investigate more here. We now understand why this is going on, and so on. So it is a way to visualize, but the real reason we're there is not just to draw pretty pictures, but is to increase understanding, and especially to increase understanding for those people that need to do something here. So either managers in their organization or legal folks in their investigations. And I can't remember what the first question was.
Basically, could you use a network map of the Trump organization to determine whether it was criminal or not?
Well, you can use a network map to help you, and again, to see, what these connections were, and let this map be like any other map and guide you to where you're going. But there's no such thing as a criminal network map. There's not anything that says, oh, this is definitely a criminal organization. And it's the same thing with terrorist organizations. So I used to, when I went to Washington and talked to all these three-letter agencies, I used to show them, after my talk, I used to give them a little quiz to say, okay, see if you folks are paying attention. And I used to show them two maps. I showed them a map from a corporate IT department, a network, and then I showed them a map from Al Qaeda. And I said, okay, you tell me which is which. And lo and behold, it was always 50-50. Some people say, no, it's the one on the right. No, it's the one on the left. And nobody could agree, because in the end, a lot of these networks end up looking like human networks because there's humans trying to get things done. Now, some of the people are trying to get good things done, and some of the people are trying to get bad things done. But in the end, a project team is a project team. So you got to figure out what's going on here. Are there, best way to tell what's a terrorist network is to show that there's terrorist nodes in it. And it's not the shape of the network, but it's who's in it and what they're doing. But the shape of the network helps you investigate, helps you make sense of what's going on. And, I don't know if any of you watch crime shows or detective shows on TV, but there's always a map with threads and, connections, and the police are trying to figure out, how things are connected and who did what. And that, again, is the real benefit of these maps. They're sense-making documents. They help guide you to understand what's going on. They help you to clear the clouds, to blow away the fog.
Well, on that note, Valdis, I think because our next speaker is formerly from one of these three-letter agencies, so I think that's a really good segue. Thank you so much for joining us. The last thing I'll do is I'm going to drop into chat the link to the tweet with the video from Led by Donkeys that you shared with me last week, and it's just,
okay.
For our viewers here, it's the video in this tweet is basically 6 minute long, showing the corruption in UK context recently, and as Valdis showed with the clippings that exposed the corruption maps in Ohio and things like that, and Al Qaeda. It has the raw materials you need as an exercise to draw your own map of corruption in these days in the UK. So we leave that for you for your consideration to have a play. Will you be joining us tomorrow? Do you know?
Yeah, I will. And if anybody wants to talk about that or has their own data set they'd like to get started on, I would gladly discuss those and hopefully get you pointed in the right direction.